Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I'm going to be doing a Survivor video, which is kind of a cool thing because we're in the middle of the NBA playoffs, but I just have had this Survivor video idea for a while and I want to do it. As you may notice, I'm back in my regular home. I left my parents' house a few days ago. I was just there for a couple days, but back in the regular digs, and so today we're talking about Survivor, and I want to handle the concept of the bitter jury and what it really means, and what are some examples of when it has transpired and other times when it's been avoided because of certain things. So I am going to basically just define what the concept is and then give you the examples of when it is in place and when it's not in place, and talk about what it means for the game and if anything actually needs to be done about it or changed because of the whole thing. So, starting off with, as we all know in Survivor, a big concept of the game is that the jury that decides who the winner is ultimately at the end of the game consists of all the people that have been voted out. So this is interesting in the idea that the game is not really just about being able to eliminate players and further yourself in the game. It's also about how you eliminate them and how you treat others, because you basically can't be a sore winner or else you won't win in some circumstances if the jury is bitter, because they'll hold it against you that you were rude to them essentially. So this creates a really big wrinkle in the entire game, in that a person cannot gloat when they're playing well in the game. You have to be extremely humble to do well most of the time in the game. It's rare, or maybe I should say uncommon, that a winner is arrogant and gloats about how well they're doing throughout the game, and then the jury rewards them at the end because they're so sick and tired of hearing about them. And so usually what most people try to do is be pretty humble in the final jury, and humble but assertive. I feel like it's the best approach. Like an example of that would be like Todd in China. He credited Amanda for making the good moves that helped him get far too, but he also definitively said, like, I think I'm the best player up here. So I think that's kind of your best approach. You have to be humble and give credit where it's due to other people around you, but you also have to assert yourself. But that's besides the point, really, of the bitter jury. So the whole concept of the bitter jury is that the jury members who are voting for the final person are very bitter, for lack of a better word, on how they were treated or eliminated. And basically, they don't vote for the person who's the easy choice, and they vote for someone else just because they're annoyed or upset with the way that they were voted out of the game or how they were treated by the people that voted them out. So now today, the best two examples I think that I have for this are, for an example where it did happen, where a person got screwed by the whole concept of the bitter jury, is the season 19 Samoa with Russell Hantz, who I think is someone that most people who watch Survivor know. I'm not considering season 20 because although I think that he was faltered by a bitter jury in that one too, I think that even if he had not had a bitter jury, he still wouldn't have won, because I think him and Parvati played about the same game and people just liked her more, so they were going to vote for her over him. So even if he had treated people well, or if people hadn't been bitter, I still think that she would have won because they played about the same game and people just liked her more. So I'm not going to include that. I'm going to include season 19 for my example of a bitter jury at work, and for my example of where a player acted arrogant and basically didn't care about treating the jury well, but it didn't come back to bite them. That example is going to be Tony from Cagayan, season 28. It's one of, I think, the rare times where a person didn't really think about how they were treating the jury, and they won. He played the best game, but because of how he treated people, you'd think they would come back to bite him and the jury wouldn't vote for him to win. But it was a situation where he actually did win, which is pretty rare. But first I'm going to cover Russell and Samoa. So in case you need a brief recap, and spoilers ahead for all of this, in case you don't want it spoiled, maybe save the video for after you finish these 2 seasons. But in Samoa, Russell is basically the main focus of the whole season, and he gets a good alliance going of all people who don't really have a shot to win the game. They're kind of coattail riders and goats who no one would really vote for normally. And Russell pulls off tons of great moves during the course of the season. At the merge, they're down 4 players to 8, yet they get to be the final. Their 4 get down to the final 5, and then the final 3 were 3 people of their alliance, and so that's incredibly impressive. He played immunity idols at the perfect times. He found, I think, about 4 immunity idols and played all of them at the right times. He was able to sway certain people from the opposite side to his side. So he really did a good job. Was the orchestrator of like all of the votes. Really knew when he should take certain people out so that they could become a threat later down the line. So he really played a good game strategically, about a perfect game strategically. As far as gameplay, he won, I think, 2 immunity challenges, so that's pretty good. He won the most important one, which secured his alliance being the final 3, the last immunity challenge, which was huge because if the guy named Brett from the other alliance, if he would have been in the final 3, he would have gotten all the votes, all the jury members were saying. But so he gets Russell gets to the final 3 with his 2 sidekicks that really did nothing. And the final vote was Russell 2, Natalie 7. And Natalie made one minor move that what paid off to be good, in that she became friends with the girls and convinced them that she was going to side with them, and then got them to vote out one of their own. So that was a big move, but really besides that, it was nothing compared to Russell. Now yes, Natalie played a better social game in that she didn't piss anyone off, and Russell played a really bad social game in that he got everyone angry, and so then the jury was very bitter because a lot of these were blindsides and people did not expect to be voted out, and then boom, Russell gets them and they're voted off and they're very bitter about it. And so that's ultimately why Russell didn't win, is because he didn't really treat people that well and they were all blindsided and really annoyed about it. And so they took it out on Russell by not voting for him when he was clearly the best player of the 3 that were competing for the title. So that's like a really good example of a bitter jury. They basically don't vote for the person that deserves it because they're upset with how that they were eliminated from the game, just to be spiteful and get back at the deserving winner. And so now I'm going to talk about the example from Cagayan. Tony played a somewhat similar game to Russell, found lots of immunity idols, played them at the right times for the most part. Maybe won an immunity challenge or 2, so he did decent as far as gameplay and challenges. He had some good alliances, was able to sway people to his side and get the votes all figured out right. And he cut throats too, you know. He didn't have a problem with blindsiding people. Like when Trish went home, that was a pretty big blindside at the final 5, and he really didn't have that much loyalty to many people. You would say probably Wu, and that's about it, because he needed somebody to be in his alliance. And so when they got down to the final 2, I think Wu was almost banking on that idea that Tony wouldn't get votes because of all the throats that he slit with all the blindsides. And so Wu in the final tribal really pitched very hard, like, I was a straight shooter, I told the truth to people, Tony was the orchestrator who blindsided all of you, I just went along with it. And he was like, I tried to play the game honorably, etc., etc. But I think Spencer made a great point in his statement at Final Tribal that he was like, you know, just because Tony was the one making the plans doesn't mean that you have no fault in this, because you just followed the plans. So you're just as bad as Tony, except less smart, because Tony was the one coming up with the plans, which is a great point. But then at the end of his statement, Spencer looks at the jury and he says, you may not like how Tony played the game. You may feel like you got slighted in how you were voted off, or that he outsmarted you and you feel bad about it, or that he didn't treat you with the utmost respect that you should have been treated with, etc., etc. But he finished with, but you know what? Tony definitely played the best game, and there's no question about it. So even if your feelings are hurt, you should really just vote for the right person, because this is about who deserves to win the game, not who do I like more. And then he went on and had a bunch of other things that he said, but essentially his message was, Tony played the best game. Just vote for the best player instead of having some personal vendetta that gets in the way of who actually deserves to win the game. Now, I think that this is one of the most interesting final tribal statements that jury member has ever given. Tony burned Spencer. He was also a burned member of the jury who he had every right to be pissed and angry at Tony, but he was able to remove himself from the situation, have more of an outside perspective, and he could observe that Tony really played the better game than Wu, and Tony deserved to win. And obviously he did, because if you watch the season, you realize it. Wu is a really likable guy and all that, but he's sort of just standing around a lot of the time and not scrambling as much as Tony was. Tony worked hard for the win, much like Russell worked hard, and Natalie sort of sat around the whole time. And so that's my point, is that, or should I say, my point is, I feel like the jury members, as hard as it is, really struggle to remove themselves from the situation and see things more clearly, because they're all wrapped up in themselves and how they got eliminated, but they can't think about themselves in the situation as much. They have to think about the two players that they're considering to vote for. Because in Russell's situation, I think that everyone, when they thought about who they were going to vote for, thought about, well, Russell voted me out, so I don't want to vote for him because he did me wrong, basically. Whereas Tony did the same thing, but the jury members were able to realize, like, that's part of the game. There's only going to be one winner. Some people are going to get eliminated. It's part of the game. So, do I think that Russell deserved to win Samoa? Yes, definitely. I think he was the clear-cut winner, and I think that he suffered from having a group of people that were sour about how they got voted out. And so now I'm going to transition to talking about, do I think that this needs to be changed from Survivor? And I think that my answer is ultimately no. I don't think that anything needs to change in the process of the game. But, it just is one of the it's one of the, not problems of the game, but it's one of the worst parts of the game. Like, if there's a weakness to how Survivor was set up, it might be that whole concept of the jury having total control over who they vote for, because I feel like, in a sense, they could make it very arbitrary if they wanted to. Like, let's take Samoa. They really didn't have any good reasons to vote for Natalie, except, well, she didn't offend us. I guess she was nice. That was like their reasoning, is that she was nice and she didn't really piss anyone off. So that's like part of a social game, but that's not even a complete social game. Because a complete social game is using your social standing in the group to further your strategy. And yes, Natalie did this one time, but that's one time over the course of 39 days. And yes, was it a very helpful move? Yeah, it was, but it wasn't enough to warrant a win. It wasn't the thing that changed the entire tide. Because even if that move would have happened, the thing that Russell did the next week saved them further, because if Russell hadn't played his idol, he would have been gone. They would have been picked off 1, 2, 3 after that, and Natalie's blindside of Eric wouldn't have even mattered, because they still would have had the advantage 7-3 if Russell hadn't played his idol right. So I don't think that you can argue that Natalie is the deserving winner. She just pissed off less people, which is a part of the game. Social game is part of it, but I just think that if you look at Russell, he definitely deserved to win over her. And so I don't think that the bitter jury or the jury in general needs to be adjusted in any way. But Russell did bring up in one of the after shows that the jury shouldn't have total control over who wins, and maybe like America should have a say. I don't know about that. That's like, I think that in his case that would have been right, but I think in a lot of cases, the jury knows best because us as the fans, we see an hour for about every 3 days that they spend out there. Let's figure we see about 13, 14 episodes a season for 39 days of them being out there. That's about us watching an hour of every 3 days that they're out there. So I think the jury members really know the people a lot better than we do and can really judge their actions a lot better than we can. But they also have the disadvantage of not getting proper perspective like the fans can. But all that being said, I think that it's good the way it is, and I think they get it right most of the time. There are a few examples where maybe they don't get it right, but that's just the nature of the game, and I don't know if it's a problem of the game or more of a problem of the player. Like, you could argue, well, Russell didn't win Samoa because of his terrible social game, He did play good in other facets, but maybe his social game was so bad, maybe he played a worse social game than he did play a good strategic game. You could argue that. I guess I don't believe that, but you can make that argument and argue that he didn't deserve to win because, in fact, he did not win. But it gets into a lot of hypotheticals if you go down the rabbit hole with this, but I just kind of wanted to give an overview of what I thought. 2 examples of guys who played similar games, and you would expect a similar result, but they were about the opposite results. I just wish that every tribal had a guy like Spencer on it who would be able to say, hey guys, let's remove ourselves from the situation and be able to think level-headed and realize that we were outplayed. Because if Spencer would have been on Russell's tribal or on Russell's jury, Russell wins that. I'm pretty sure, because he would have made the same pitch, and I think people would have been moved the same way as they were for Tony. So that's a point that way too many people forget. So to wrap it all up, guys, the bitter jury is a very interesting concept in the game of Survivor. It's probably one of, if not the biggest keys to winning the game is jury management. And I think to be successful, you have to remember your social game, which is basically the key to jury management is your social game. So you can play great strategically, but if you don't treat people right, you're not going to win. And the main reason that I don't think it should be removed is that the 3 pillars of the game are strategy, gameplay, and challenges, and your social game. And so to remove the whole way that the jury votes is to remove most of the social game. So I don't think it should be removed at all or changed really. I just think that it's really interesting how in some seasons it's like the determining factor of why a player does or doesn't win. And in other seasons, it doesn't really play an impact because people think more level-headed. So that's my take, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you continue to tune in. I'll see you next time. Bye.